That's what I would say by way of instruction, Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chambers. Okay, it's open to members for comment, questions. Councillor Dearden.
Yeah, I'd ask for some leniency because as a representative in Hythe, I think there should be some deference to the fact that it is happening in Hythe. We've all had some correspondence from Jim Martin, who is a professional person of chartered surveyors who's raised a number of issues. And I've also had some emails, or a email from one of our backbenchers, David Owen, who's in the back of the hall at the moment. So that's the situation with regard to looking at what people have been saying other than the official reports that we've had. My concern effectively is, well, firstly, I do want a swimming pool for Hythe. My preference would be the existing site. One of the things Jim Martin brought through was that he'd put forward proposals where you could have had one on the existing site with 40 flats above. I just want to touch upon that and understand that that has nowhere to go. I've never been in favour of the Nichols Quarry position because I think it's too far out of Hythe. And whereas I would like Princess Parade to remain as it is, if at all possible, I accept pragmatically that if there is no alternative, I would support a pool on the Princess Parade site. Now, that's the background. The situation is that by any calculation, there is a shortfall. On our calculation, 1 point something million, on Mr. Martin's 10 million. There are assumptions based on 2012 figures. There are assumptions based on the viability of selling the houses where we are in a buoyant market and what's going to happen if we don't have a buoyant market. There are assumptions about the Eversley site, and there are no assumptions as such that we can take on board with regard to the site itself as to piling, the kind of measures that we would have to take in order to make this site safe to be used. So that concerns me. What also concerns me is the fact of ensuring that if this development goes forward, we can ensure that this is the only development that goes onto that site by way of the linear park, by way of the school if the county wished to become involved, and by way of the swimming pool. And so I would want some form of assurance that we would be looking to some form of restrictive covenant or village green status that would prevent any further development on that site. That's the first question. The second question is, how are we going to address a shortfall which on present assumptions, which if they come forward leaves us with 1.9 million or thereabouts, but if the assumptions are not correct, the site proves more difficult than we expected, or that the market just disappears and you can't sell 36 townhouses and you can't build on the Eversley site and all the other issues. Where are we going to find the shortfall? What about the question of inflation and interest, the question of it seems to me that people suggest that you can build an aircraft carrier for 3 billion and it suddenly turns into 5 billion. You know, there's that kind of underestimate, which of course again Mr. Martin has raised. Points that have been raised by David Owen again are that the maths just don't add up. There's no question of what's to be done about the ancient monument. There's no question of what's going to be done about overtopping in the event of a storm. This is going to be vulnerable to flooding if that happens. That may not be a realistic question. I mean, we may be able to put flood measures in, but it's still a question that one has to ask nowadays with the global warming situation and the fact that water levels are beginning to increase. And he's raised the issue of the deficit and other situations. And the other thing about Nichols Quarry is, whereas we're expecting money from Nichols Quarry, it's not money in the hand. The only money that's going to come out of Nichols Quarry is when they get their act into place, and I put forward the point that I objected to the development of Nichols Quarry, as did High Town Council. But once that takes off, we're not going to get the 3.2 million until part of the way down the scheme, and we've already had a Phoenix company. Now, thanks for the leniency in that I wanted to put those points, but there are a number of questions about overestimate, about how we're going to handle the site, how we're going to protect the site so that nobody else comes in for development. And the other aspect, of course, is if it's in the west, it gets close to the Imperial, and I'm sure the public will connect into it and say, well, look, if you're going to put it in the west, what's going to happen with the Hotel Imperial is already beginning to suggest, despite what they said in the past, that they would like to put forward a potential. I mean, that they're not saying we want to develop it at the moment, but colloquially in the town, we're aware that the golf club is not doing tremendously well and that type of thing. It may not happen. And I was a supporter of the Imperial development. So, but I don't want to see loads of houses on the Imperial golf course. So I know we can't do anything about that. They've only expressed interest. I know it's a planning issue, but if the development is in the west, it's more likely to connect in with something on the golf course, whereas if it's in the east, it's more likely not to. So, and it's going to be where the school is. So it's a lot of questions, but as a representative for Hythe, I think those are the questions that people in Hythe are going to ask, and why can't it be on the present side?
Well, thank you for that. We'll now take the next half an hour to have the replies to those questions. Thank you.
I will attempt to, I think I've got them all covered in terms of notes, but if at the end I've missed any, I apologise in advance. It's not deliberate, and I'm sure you'll pick me up on anything I do miss. First of all, why not the current pool site? Cabinet, when it met on the 18th of December 2012, considered the report of strategic leisure, and they do give a summary of what their view was at the time. And I think the key thing is, people have quite rightly said you could build a facility on the current pool site. Technically, of course you could, there's one there at the moment, so it can be done, no question about that. But don't forget, the work that Strategic Leisure were asked to do was to consider what is the minimum facility mix for a sustainable facility for the future. Now, that was their first question. And the first principle that Cabinet agreed in December 2012 was, this is the minimum facility mix you need for a pool for the district that's sustainable. Their brief wasn't what can you fit on a current pool site. The brief was what is the minimum mix, then where can it go within a 2.5 mile radius of the current pool site, because the Section 106 money from Nichols Quarry is restricted to the vicinity of Hythe. And the view was that 2.5 miles from the current pool site goes quite a long way. So that's the background. What Strategic Leisure said, and I'll repeat this, is existing Hythe swimming pool site. The disadvantages of this site is that it is too small and cannot provide for both future facility needs and the appropriate infrastructure, i.e. car parking. Although technically accessible, there are already car parking issues on and around this site. Development of a larger facility is likely to increase usage levels, and therefore traffic to and from the facility would impact on both traffic levels and parking requirements. So that's one point. There are two other points. If you do not utilise the current pool site in terms of potential capital receipt, there is the potential that funding is even more of an issue. GVA's view is that the current pool site could generate a capital receipt of 4.5 million. So there's a capital receipt coming in from there as well. And I think the third issue is as well, and this is one that quite often gets overlooked. If the pool is elsewhere than the current pool site, and if everything aligns and it works properly, you don't lose pool provision even temporarily to the district. If you close the current pool, the likelihood is it will be closed for a significant amount of time. So there would be no facility, or one of those temporary facilities which aren't quite the same, but there would be an issue there. So those two, capital receipt and closure of the pool business, need to be remembered. But the key issue is, for a sustainable pool to meet future needs, the experts we commissioned are of the view that the current site is simply not large enough. And that's the position Cabinet accepted on the 18th of December 2012. So that's the first question. In terms of assurances with regard to development costs, Mr. Martin's emailed me, he's emailed the members, and I've been copied in, and we've had more than one email exchange going back over the months. Mr. Martin's quite right to raise them. All I can do is repeat that this is predominantly a high level report, and what GVA did, and it's probably worth just flagging this again, is excuse me one second. Additional advice on structural requirements was sought from URS, and estimates of costs were sought from Davies Langdon. It is assumed that a 3,910 square metre facility would require piling foundations in addition to standard foundations, given reported ground conditions. An approach that assumed a 4,000 square metre parking area and its associated foundations was costed. Costs for the school were based on a per square metre typical costs, and also the application of foundation requirements that respond to conditions known at first grade. Although the costs are not based on specific designs, they are based on typical approaches and the scale of activity required. A further allowance for the disposal of contaminants required following excavations was also identified. Now, I was anticipating questions on this, so I've also looked at a bit of GVA's background and their associated companies, and it's probably worth highlighting this. GVA employed 5,700 real estate professionals in 110 offices across 20 countries. They are a large company, and I can give no assurances in relation to what the property market is going to do. Nobody can. I can't give any assurances in relation to inflation. Nobody can. But all I can do is say these are experts in their area, and we have taken their views. I've also looked at ACOM, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and I apologise to them in advance if I'm not. They have a similar wide-reaching professional network, and some of their related projects on the website are the 2002 Commonwealth Games City of Manchester Stadium and Sports City, the 2010 Greenpoint Stadium in South Africa for the World Cup, and the 2010 Moses Madiba Stadium for the South Africa World Cup. So while we are taking these costs at high level and at face value at the moment, we have to, I hope, be comforted that we are dealing with high level companies with a lot of experience. Now, I can't give the assurances you asked for, but if I gave them, I think it would be wrong, and no one would believe me anyway. I think it's, we have to deal with what we know at the time and not things we can't predict. In terms of protection, with regard to the elements of the site that aren't being considered for this scheme, if members were minded to consider the Princess Parade housing scenario number 2 in the GVA report, it basically shows a pool at the eastern end next to a school with a school playing field, then some public open space, then you're at the halfway point of the council's ownership where the footpath comes across. Then there is an element of housing, and then there is probably over a third of our overall ownership, which is open space on that plan. If the question was what could we do to ensure that that isn't developed, there are lots of things we could do. You mentioned Village Green, you mentioned restricted covenant. I know you're well aware of case law in central London yourself that is still used to protect very, very valuable real estate from development today. So, if members are minded to do that, there are things that can be done. So yeah, the Cabinet recommendation asks for you to confirm as landowner that 36 is your cap on housing. If members do not feel that is a strong enough position, it's very easy for members to pass resolutions and instruct officers to do the right things at the appropriate time, so the community has the reassurance that this is not the thin end of the wedge, for want of a better phrase. You are quite right, Councillor Dearden, to point out that the Nichols Quarry money is not in the hand. No, it's phased. It's phased over dwellings completed. It's phased over a long period of time. But the council's always known that. And that is the situation, the financial reality, whether the pool is East Parade, Nichols Quarry, current site, New Romney, not at all. That money only comes in when those triggers are met in the Section 106 agreement. So whatever happens, the council, and it's one for the finance colleagues probably more than me, the council will be faced, regardless of other issues, with cash flow management over a period of time. But that's always been a situation from when I've been at the council. So I hope that explains where we are on that. With regard to the public feeling with regard to the golf course and the high imperial and development creep, I think is the phrase I would use. I mean, the Hive Imperial have responded to the planning authority in terms of its core sites, and they've simply included their ownership in the core sites process, which any landowner is perfectly entitled to do. It's not an area that I'm personally involved in, but I know some of the basics. What I can say is I joined in July 2008, and in my first week with the previous leader, Councillor Bliss, I had a meeting with GSE where they were asking if we would be involved in a joint development or joint consideration of our sites. The steer from Councillor Bliss in 2008 was, no, we won't. Within the last 9 months, I've had a meeting with the current leader, Councillor Monk. The same issues were raised and the same steer was given. So whilst there is an adjoining development space, which is a golf course currently, and I've heard similar comments around how well the golf course is doing or otherwise. I'm operating within a steer from the leader and obviously the previous leader at the time, and there has never been any steer to me that this should move forward as a project jointly with the landowners of the golf course. And I think, given what I said about members, if they were minded to protect the rest of our site that we don't use for these facilities that are currently under discussion, hopefully that will give you some comfort, and the people who have contacted you some comfort in relation to those questions. I think, very quickly, Leader, with regard to the ancient monument, I do have a meeting scheduled in with English Heritage together with Susan Priest. The reason that meeting hasn't taken place is because, of course, Cabinet could choose to make an alternative resolution tonight, so we just penciled it in with them for a couple of weeks' time.
Councillor Love.